Hi there, and welcome on the journey to transform culture. I'm Steve, and I'll be your guide. Well, folks, hope you're having a fantastic day and an even better week. In this video, folks, we're going to talk a little bit about playing along. I know, right? You might be thinking, what are you talking about? Playing along. You know, I think we have to go back in time, right? Maybe to our youth, earlier in life, for sure, right? And and I think it's kind of the playground mentality that kind of came to life within, say, the school system. And you're probably going to get this better if you were in the public school system, or at least a large enough school system where you had plenty of students around you. Okay. But the playground mentality, where you always had, students in the class that were a little bit older, at least a year older, if not more, right? And who kind of set the tone, set the rules, kind of dictated what was happening on the playground, right? If you're playing kickball, you're doing whatever it is, right? And then as a underclassman, underclassman, you could have been second or third grade, right? But and it's even hits harder if you were new to that school, right? You don't know anyone, all the things. And but the older kids are setting the tone, right? They're setting the rules, whatever. They're kind of the enforcers. And so the the underclassmen in this situation now kind of play along, right? And why is that? Why do we play along? Well, we play along because we don't want to push back against authority, right? In some cases, it might have been physical presence, might have been the authority. It's like, I don't want to get beat up. I was beat up one time as a grade schooler in the playground where some older classmen, I don't know, they just decided they didn't like me for some random reason, threw me up against the fence and started wailing on me. And of course, my classmates, they were powerless. Of course, there was no intervention, right? And I was fine, to be honest with you. Had a big, thick jacket on. It was winter time. I think it was more of just the act of being beat on that probably was more shocking than getting wailed on a little bit. But I was, thick skin. Anyway, but in general, though, we don't push back against authority, right? We go along to get along. We play along, right? And we're playing along for what? Safety. Some of it's fear-based, right? Some of it is we just don't want to deal with things, right? We just want to enjoy the game if we're playing a sport, right? It's like, well, we're going to do it this way, and these are the rules, and this, sometimes we played along because we didn't want to waste a bunch of time. We just wanted to get through and play the game, or begin, right? Sometimes you just want to begin. Start doing a thing. Let's get going now, right? We've all kind of acquiesced to playing along a little bit, right? If you drive a vehicle and you've had to wait at a red light or a construction, situation, you're playing along, right? In this case, you're contained physically, right? Sure, there's an authority base to it, but physically, you're kind of trapped, right? So we played along when we were young to get through the situation. Perhaps we were influenced, out of fear. We didn't want to get picked on or teased or whatever, called out, whatever. Somebody bringing attention to us if you were really shy, all those things, right? So from very early on, we were playing along. We learned to play along. Now, if you were kind of the older, like if you had a bunch of siblings and that sort of thing, you had this dynamic probably happening, in a semi-continuous manner, right? Where if you were the older of the siblings, you might have been the enforcer. You might have been the, You might have been the hammer and the rest of them were the nail, right? But if you were amongst the second, third, and so on and so forth, you you were playing along in some instances to playing along a little bit to get along, right? So we can all relate to this when we were young, this playing along thing. But how we have to look now. Remember, we talk about organizational culture, but in this video, we're really just going to be talking about all of us as humans, folks, because it's all connected, right? And this whole playing along thing has been a trap. It's been a trap that we didn't realize that was being set for us from the very beginning, right? The whole notion of like the elder classmen and so on and so forth, the whole structure was put in place before we even arrived, right? It was there, for our parents and all, going back quite some time, right? Well back into history. And this has been the case, right? This has probably been a human thing just as much as any modern thing, right? We've inherited this. But what has been the damage that all of humanity has done to itself? What trap has been set? Well, within that trap of playing along, you never question certain things. Or you never, and I don't mean questioned as in you had to push back, about every single thing, right? That's chaos, right? But you didn't make anyone explain themselves. Well, why are we doing it this way? And then when that did occur, that was some fun drama, right? In the playground. You would see, that's probably where the fights would break out, right? Well, shocker, right? That any pushback or any questioning results in what? More conflict. Remind you of anything? Look at the globe. It reminds you of anything at all? So this playing along by not asking questions, by not, holding the same logical standards for others, across the board, by not doing that, but this playing along, then this is what happens. The rules get changed on us, right? You may, if you work in an organization, if you don't speak up, if you've been so, if you acquiesce so much of your life that you never spoke up to bring something to attention. And I've seen this in organizations too, where I've come in to help, where the broader team feels like they've been, just, the old term, shut up and color, right? Meaning a coloring book, like a little kid, here's your coloring book, just shut up and color. That whole mentality. And it's, it's obviously a slight. Just shut up and color because we're just doing what we're told to do, right? But the blood runs out of us and we stop thinking, right? That whole playing along has stopped us from allowing our intellect and our passion about what we're doing enter into the picture. Now, I'm not painting with a broad brush. It's not like every single person's in this situation, but there are many who are. And you have to ask yourself, when in organization or a group and culture of any measure, friend groups, families, all of it, when failures have occurred in substantial ways, what is absolutely true? What is absolutely true is you can walk back layer by layer and find where something, the chain wasn't broken, the safety chain essentially wasn't broken. And at some point, people just played along, right? Because they didn't want to deal with drama, or they didn't want to deal with this and deal with that. And so a worse result occurs, right? A result nobody wants but nobody spoke up, right? And we see this in culture. We see this often. We see it dramatized too, right? If you want to watch a good movie about this, watch the movie Arlington Road. If that doesn't wake you up, nothing will. But speaking up, right? Speaking up and taking ownership, so a lot of this is tied into so many other things, right? Taking ownership. You may have been raised, obviously we were all raised to, hey, our parents, hey, do this, do that. Okay, take care of the things, do the chores, all the stuff, right? But, so obviously we've got to, there's a certain level of compliance, right? But if you've fallen into the trap of requiring everybody to just tell us what to do all the time, if we haven't, even for those of us who think, well, we think for ourselves, we can fall into a trap, right? I know I've done it. Look, folks, we have to be honest with ourselves. I'm well older now. And there's still times where I can tell when the much older family members, are talking to me or whatever, there's a part of me that acquiesces, that, intellectually and emotionally and everything kind of falls a little bit back into that younger guy stage, right? Where you'll lose some critical thinking skills because you want them to feel comfortable, right? Now, you kind of have to do this a little bit. We kind of have to drop, some of our, if you're a race car driver and you've got an elderly family member that needs a ride to their doctor's appointment, you're not driving like a race car driver through town, I hope, through town to get them there, right? You're not. You're driving, if anything, like the most gentle limousine driver or whatever, right? And, or taxi, Uber, whatever. You're driving very methodically, safely, right? You're not driving like a race car driver. And this is the same analogy that I would use talking about our intellect and our emotions. We kind of dial it back and we can, look, folks, we can trick ourselves into thinking that we're doing this out of respect. But the reality is we may put it in that box, but it didn't start in that box. It started as, it started in a different place when we were young people, right? It wasn't, well, out of respect. Of course, generally, you respect your elders, but it's not going to disrespect, hopefully. But but the idea here is that we don't want to get rid of and lose all of our intellectual and emotional and our communication abilities and all of these things, right? Our critical thinking skills, right? You could have, be very educated or just very experienced out in the world compared to, say, your friends or family, for example, right? Do you set back? When you compete? Here's another thing. You might be a competitive person in sports, right? Or any kind of activity, right? Let's say you're a, competition, dart thrower. I don't even know what the technical term is that for that. But you throw darts. You're a pro, let's say. You don't go home and hang out at the pub with your friends and just start. I mean, you might at first just for fun, just to mess with them. But then you might throw with your offhand or something, right? Just to mix it up and have fun, because you're not there to completely dominate them, right? There's a piece of this where it makes sense, right? Take off your race car hat, put on your chauffeur hat, right? That's fine. That's not what we're talking about. We're talking about when we've lost our ability to speak up, because we can take very easily these examples and see how easily you go into your organization. And now you're not as committed. With your family and your friends, you're committed, but you may or just be playing along as if you're committed in your organizations and then within the culture at large, right? Think about it. If folks are just trying to get theirs, right? That whole get theirs absolutely can be about, well, I'm just playing along so I can get mine. I don't really care what happens to everybody else, right? That I'm just trying to get mine. I don't care what happens to anybody else, right? We can laugh at it, haha, but the reality here is people are just playing along. Now, if you're working with these folks or you're, operating within and around all these folks, these are also the same folks you've got to drive and share the roads with, right? Do they care about your safety as much as their own? You would hope so, but you don't know that, because if they're completely, in a mode of not participating, right? That's really what we're talking about here. Playing along or as if, right? Playing along as if. You think that they're participating just like you are, but they're not. They're just trying to get theirs, right? And everyone else be damned. And now, if you think about it, you pan back, now look at the culture at large. It doesn't matter if we're talking about communities, right? Countries, the globe, right? You pan back, you can see where whole nation states operate like this. Well, as long as we get ours, who cares what happens to everybody else, right? That kind of mentality, right? Playing along as if until there's a little pressure. And then you find out really quickly that they aren't there for the team, right? They aren't there for the we, they're only there for the me, okay? And this is where this playing along thing, and people do this all the time, folks. People sidestep conflict. Now, generally speaking, don't run into conflict, don't race into conflict with people. But sometimes conflict will find you, and you can only sidestep it for so long until you have to say, stop, enough is enough, right? And if we don't say enough is enough, we keep playing along, right, as if, right? And it's coming back. You might be thinking, well, I'm just getting my own, I'm just taking care of me, and who cares what happens to everybody else? Well, the problem is when you think like that, eventually the system implodes on itself. The system will fold in on itself. And why is that? Because nobody is questioning or asking questions, which is holding up the walls, right, on the world that we live in. These walls aren't standing on their own. They're being held up by our efforts, by our love, by our concern, by our passion, by our desire for cultures to grow together healthily, right? It's not being held up because, well, as long as I get mine. Well, that's people taking their hand off the walls, right? And then next thing you know, the walls will start caving in on us, okay? Because why? Our standards drop, our safety drops, right? We're now no longer looking after one another as a responsible culture, right? It's kind of each to their own, right? Now we know we have to live with that in some respects anyway, right? Because, hey, we have to, live our own professional lives and take care of our responsibilities and all those things, right? Some of that is already inherent in the way we live already. But if you're just playing along within your organizations, then something unsafe happens, right? And then, and traumatic and horrible things happen when we're unsafe, right? If I'm just playing along. The quality of our product or service goes down. Then what? Something unsafe or negative, or heinous happens to our customers out in the world who are using our product or or utilizing our services, right? Everything is connected, folks. So if we're just playing along, we're not being genuine. We're not fully investing, right? And so we have to ask ourselves, what was our conditioning? Are we questioning that conditioning? Are we questioning, our ability or desire or responsibility, probably more applicably, to speak up? Because speaking up now might save somebody else later, right? When I was in the Air Force, right, I was on wing safety flying, part of wing safety, and there's a chain of events that happens up to accidents, right? And when you drive it all back, typically it's people, it's their awareness, right? We call it career resource management, but it's the awareness and communication. If I have an awareness, if I'm flying along and I see a bird out there and I'm just like, well, it's just a bird. It's no big deal. It'll be fine. Well, and I don't say anything, we don't avoid it, well, that could be the end of that aircraft and everybody on board, right? So you have to challenge your innate conditioning not to speak up or not to ask the questions. Remember, not every bit about speaking up or asking questions is always pushing back against authority or the rules. Sometimes it's asking for clarification, right? Well, wait a second. So you're saying, this can be done in this situation, but it can't be done in that situation, right? It may be a fairness thing. It may be a safety thing. It may be a functional thing. It may be a quality thing. It may be all kinds of different things. But if you're not asking for clarification on something, you're not going to get the clarification. And if you're doing that, you're just playing along. Don't play along is the message here, folks. The message isn't, well, we're terrible people because we've just played along in our lives. Look, folks, we have every single one of us, without exception, have been conditioned within this life, okay, to play along and to not ask questions. Just play along and it'll all be fine. Just don't worry about it. It'll pass, right? Don't worry about it. It'll pass. Tell somebody with kidney stones that. Don't worry about it. I know it's painful. Just don't worry about it. It'll pass, right? It's something we have to dive into, folks, and we have to ask ourselves. And here's the other part of this. We have to ask ourselves, are we conditioning our children and grandchildren not to ask questions and to just play along, right? Don't ask questions, just go along with everything. It'll be fine, blah, blah, blah at school or blah, blah, blah in the world, whatever it is, right? Well, then what you have is you have people who don't ask questions, they don't get clarification, and they're taken advantage of. People are stealing their money when they're old, all the different negative things. You can track just about every single thing that happens negatively to people all throughout culture back to one simple thing. People are not questioning, right? They're not questioning for clarification, right? To get somebody to prove their case, essentially. Prove that what is being said or done here matters, right? And because of that, people are taken advantage of, and we have to be the ones who break the chain. So this video for me is breaking the chain, and hopefully for you to reflect upon as we are, taking care of our families and our friends and our communities and in our organizations and everywhere, all throughout culture, that we're not just playing along. Because look, folks, you can definitely track the playing along, right? The apathy of just playing along. You can track that definitely to how productive, how much turnover there is, how much waste there is, all throughout culture, right? We can track it because organizations are required to track these things, right? You can literally take their percentage of waste, and you could probably attribute about half of that to people just playing along and not asking questions and not questioning anything. Well, I'm just doing the thing. Nobody said don't do this other thing, so I just keep doing it. Meanwhile, products coming out terrible and all the things, and which means that the cost of the end product is going up for consumers to no fault, from no fault of their own, right? It's just all manufactured pricing. Why? Based on the inefficiency that is tracked directly back to our behavior. And part of this is playing along, folks. So question it. And I will tell you this, if you're an organizational leader or owner, if you make, folks understand these concepts, right, that I talk about in a lot of these videos, to include just playing along, you don't want folks just playing along. I would rather somebody challenge me to be my best for the customer, right? So if it's a member of the team or member of the leadership team or the broader team, and something seems, what we used to say in the Air Force, dumb, dangerous, or different, ask the question, right? Challenge something. If it doesn't seem right, it probably isn't, or we need to verify something's up, right? And make corrections. And better we do it now than we wait, after we've been, say, producing a product for a week, or we've been providing XYZ service, or we haven't changed, the marketing materials, and so therefore all the pricing's off and all the stuff's wrong. So remember, question it early, question often, but not as a pushback to common sense, okay? You don't want to be a pariah about questioning. Make it about something that matters to the entire process. And it might be for yourself too, and that's fine. Clarification for your own understanding, absolutely perfect to get that. So on that note, folks, we'll wrap it up. Remember, hit that good green domino 3 to 5 times a day or more to uplift, motivate, inspire, and just encourage one another. When you do this, not only are you hoping to transform culture, but you're transforming your own life. But don't forget, we can't transform anything on the outside if we're not first willing to transform on the inside. This is so important. All right, folks, have a fantastic day. Hit like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, we'll talk to you later.